Welcome to Workplace Straight Talk with Gloria Carter Hicks, the president and CEO of Hicks Carter Hicks, and your host. Because some things need to be said about the workplace, Gloria will be saying them right here at Workplace Straight Talk. Look for new episodes on the fourth Monday of the month. Thank you for tuning in. Would you hire yourself? That is the question. And our first episode of our podcast series, it's all about you, the employee. I am Gloria Carter Hicks, your host, and joining me today is our co-host, and that is Margie Torillo. Hi, Margie.
Hi, Gloria. How are you?
I am doing well. Margie is not just a co-host. Margie is also an employee with Hicks Carter Hicks, celebrating a 6-month anniversary. Margie happens to be our learning and development consultant, but she brings with her over 15 years of human resources and learning and development experience. And today we're going to share some personal stories of success with you about being marketable and employable. But we're also going to talk about some tips and tools and things that you can do in a job market that is somewhat cooling off and highly influenced by AI. What can you do to compete? Not just externally looking for a new job, but also internally looking for promotions or some sort of lateral move or working on special projects. Our tips and tools can be used anywhere. So let's get started because I want you to hear Margie's story about how she decided to come to work for Hicks Carter Hicks and how she used her employability and her marketing skills to get this job. Margie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Gloria, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank
So
you.
I was not actually looking for a job necessarily. I was casually scrolling through LinkedIn when I saw this job position, and I thought the role looked really interesting, fulfilling, and fun. And so I sent in my resume and heard back just a couple of days later that I was offered a virtual interview, which I was super excited about. And I will tell you, Gloria, you made that interview so easy because it was conversational. It wasn't nerve wracking. You still asked the questions, the interview questions, but you gave me a chance to really think about what I could bring to Hicks Carter Hicks. What competencies, what behaviors, what skills that I have. And so what was an interview turned into a really nice conversation, I think. And then I did receive an email just a few days later asking for an in-person interview. And with that interview, I actually had to come up with two scenarios, real world scenarios. One was a training facilitation piece, and another was a consulting piece.
Well, Margie, when you get an interview, usually somebody's looking at your resume and they make a determination at that time that, I'm going to do an initial interview, and then you move on to the next step. And you did really well in the first interview, but your resume is what got you the first initial interview. And so I want to talk about resumes just for a minute, because what's important about a resume is that it needs to convey to whoever is looking at it that, yes, you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities, true, but it's not just repeating a job description or a job posting. It is actually outlining the results that you have achieved over your career time and where you can create value. So I'm going to be honest with you. I saw your resume and I said, wow, I wish we had have seen this resume a little sooner. But guess what? Better late than never. You are on our team, and that is all that really matters. But the resume piece is important, but it's about creating value. So one of the things that we did, we gave you two real life scenarios because we did just say that, AI is influencing what we do. And sometimes people are dropping job descriptions and postings in AI and creating a resume, and we know that. So we ask you to come with two scenarios: consulting and facilitation and training. And you just absolutely nailed that. But you told me afterwards that your friend told you not to do some things, but you didn't take their advice. So, how did you approach that second interview?
So whenever I have an interview, whether it's virtual, in person, no matter what job it would be for, what role, I take it as a second job. So when I would take my evenings and I looked up the company. Does it seem like the values are similar to my values? What kind of certifications does the company have? What programs are they involved in? And so, as I was telling my really good friend who knows me very well, she was saying, "Oh, that sounds great." And I showed her the job position. She was like, "Oh yeah, you're gonna love this." And then I told her I had to give two real world scenarios. And it's funny because as soon as I started explaining the training and facilitation piece that I was going to do, she said, "Please tell me you're not going to like actually stand up and give like icebreakers and introduce yourself." And I said, "I am." And she was like, "I wouldn't." She's like, "Just go in there and kind of tell them what you would do, but don't actually act like it's a real life scenario." But I did not listen to my best friend. I came in, we started, it was storming that day. And so one of the other people that was part of the interview was maybe about 2 minutes late. And when she walked in, I said, "Hey, come on in, welcome. Here's a packet of information," just as I would have done for a real training or facilitation course for any organization. And I kind of chuckled to myself because I know my best friend was like, she would have, had her head down. But that's what it's about. It's not just showing that you're knowledgeable, capable, you have the skills and abilities. It's showing who you are at the core. Who is Margie?
And we saw that in you because you can't fake a resume or you can't fake an interview when people start asking you, how would you apply your knowledge, skills, abilities, your competencies, your talent to a real live scenario? And we ask follow up questions, we drill down. So AI can't help you there if you don't have the experience. And when we come to the interview, hiring managers, HR people, business owners, we're looking to know that you really have concrete answers. So you can't fake it till you make it in an interview if you really want the interviewer to
Mhm.
experience what you know. And you did exceptionally well there. The other thing, you showed up before I showed up. Now, I wasn't late, I was early, and you were earlier than I was getting there because I wanted to make sure when I got in the office, everything was set up for you, and you were already there. And so the receptionist, they said to me, "You need to hire her." They had an interaction with you before I got there and they told me when I walked in, "She's really good. I think you need to hire her." And I'm like, "Well, you weren't a part of the interview process, but you're part of the team." And so you were there early. You had a great interaction with someone that was greeting you, and you actually had more than just a presentation. You brought handouts and everything to prepare if something didn't go well for you. So tell me a little bit more about what candidates should be thinking about when they're talking to people that aren't even a part of the hiring team.
Absolutely. So, first impressions, my mom taught my brother and I this from a very young age, but first impressions truly are so important. Even if it's not the first impression with the person who's interviewing you or a panel of interviewers, it's really if it's a receptionist, if it's an email that somebody is sending, maybe it's an admin, whoever it is, you want to make sure that you're treating them with that same respect, that same level of knowledge, because they're probably going to give their input, whether it's positive or, they might say this person has some opportunities, right? And so that's the first thing I say is just treat people with the dignity and respect. And then the second piece is show up on time early if you know you're going to have to present. So for me, I wasn't exactly sure where the office was. I didn't know how traffic was. I didn't it was storming that morning, or it was supposed to start storming that afternoon, I should say, and so I wanted to make sure I was prepared. So when I got there, I talked to the receptionist. I set up my all of my laptop and, made sure it was ready. But I didn't know what kind of AV they were going to have. So I said, I better have something else in case I'm not able to use the technology here.
Mhm.
And, things go wrong, especially with technology. We know that computers, laptops, Bluetooth, they all have a mind of their own. And so, really, how do you handle that in that moment is really what you have to ask yourself. Because of course we can prepare and, leave 2 hours
Mhm.
early and have everything, but that doesn't mean that it's going to go super supernatural.
That's kind of funny because the reason we said use your AV, because when we're working with clients, a lot of times, or if we're in a hotel presenting, sometimes we're using our business equipment. And if something doesn't line up the way it should be, we want to see how well someone is going to address those issues. So we were trying to make the scenario as real world as it possibly could be, and you came with a backup plan just in case things did not work out. So you need to be prepared. That's one of the things that's so important. Now, I'm going to ask you another question. And this is, would you have hired yourself for that job if it were 2016 and you were applying for a learning and development job? Would you have been ready in 2016? And I know this thing is going on with social media right
Yeah.
now. Well, let's take a 10-year look back, 2016 versus where I am today. Tell me who Margie was in 2016. Would you have hired yourself?
So, Gloria, Margie was just out of her master's program. I had just graduated and I was feeling good about that, which is something totally to be proud of. And so I got my first corporate style interview and I had the perfect suit and, the heels to match. But unfortunately, my resume looked beautiful, but I was not able to drill down. I was not ready for that role. And so, yes, I had the master's and I had some experience, not nearly enough. But when I think about it, I would have not hired myself either because I wasn't ready. And so we have to remember that in the workforce, just because you have one piece of the puzzle doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready for that next role, whether that's a promotion, lateral, vertical, whatever it might be. And so, no, I would not have hired myself. And my 2026 self would have told my 2016 self, I probably should have studied more of that resume and that job position and that organization instead of just being worried about the executive presence, which is important, but
Mhm.
it's a piece of that puzzle.
Well, it's the whole picture. It's the whole package that's important. And we're going to get into that. It's things like your brand, your skills, your presence, your interpersonal skills,
Mhm.
your ability to interact with people. And so it's the total package when you are going to interview. And Margie, even though I've been in business for 27 years here at Hicks Carter Hicks, I thought I was ready to start a business much earlier than 27 years ago. And I needed a reality check that I probably need to spend some more time in the corporate world. I probably need to strengthen my business skills. There are
Mhm.
things that I need to do personally, even though my desire was to start a business over 27 years ago. The reality was I was not ready. And so the corporate experience gave me the knowledge, the skills, the ability to be ready. So that goes back 2016, further than 2016, actually. But if I'm looking at just 2016 and the last 10 years, we're not the same business. We're not using the same technology platforms. We had different expectations in terms of how we deliver our services. We've improved what we have done over the last 10 years. And so I think it's really important for people to reflect when they're looking back over the last 10 years. Is it, I have repeated 1 year 10 times?
Mhm.
Or have I really grown over that 10-year period with new knowledge, skills, ability? Have I been more engaged in developing myself and contributing to the company where I work? So I think looking back over 10 years is a really good reality check for people. But I want them to ask themselves, was it 1 year I experienced 10 times, or did I actually grow over that 10 years? I think that might even be a good interview question to ask people.
I think
What have
so.
you done to develop in the last 10 years?
And Gloria, if I
So,
could just add to that, you
yes.
know, from being in the HR business side of it, that is really something that I think recruiters look for and hiring managers is what are you doing to develop yourself? So what are you doing above and beyond your 8 to 5, if you will, to continue that growth? For me, I read books. I read books that are, HR related, business related, development, leadership. And so I think you have to ask yourself, what am I doing to grow because you don't just want to grow in your 8 to 5. You want to grow in your entire experience so that everything is being touched by that.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned that it's not just 8 to 5, that you do some things with your personal time that is
Mhm.
meant to invest in yourself. Yes, we as companies, we ask people to participate in professional activities to grow, to keep their skills up, to keep their certifications updated. We ask them to do all of that. But going beyond just my 8 to 5, that's a
Mhm.
personal investment. Why do you think that's so important? Because some people, I'm only going to do it if I can do it on company time. I've heard some people say that. Company time is good, but there's other times where you have to go beyond. Why did you make that choice? Some people would say a sacrifice.
I make it because I want to invest in me. And I know that if I want to grow my career, let's say, or I want to grow in my current role, or I want to learn about industry standards, it becomes a total package for me. It becomes part of my life. And so I truly believe that we have to sometimes step out of our comfort zones of just doing that 8 to 5 and what else can I do to learn? I also love to learn. So for me, it's easy, right? But I really just think taking that initiative, it's not investing necessarily in the organization, it's investing in yourself.
Now, thank you for saying that because we know there's organizational changes, there's downsizing, there's right sizing, and the most important thing that we can do if something changes is to be employable and marketable. Whether I am in my current job and company trying to increase my career skills and promotional opportunities, or I'm looking for a new job. You are the CEO of your own career, so you should be always preparing to get ready for the next thing that might happen, whether it is a part of your plan or somebody is making a plan for you. And so I'm glad to hear you say investing in yourself also equals employability and marketability. Let's talk about brand. I want to get into some of the things that people really should think about in terms of their personal brand. When we interview people and get ready to hire people, there are things called reference checks. Now, we live in a very litigious environment, so you probably are not going to be able to get much information from a past employer, but you need to live your brand as if you are going to ask people to give you a reference. So, talk about brand.
So for me, it is really who I am at the core. So it is who I am before I step into work. It is who I am before I step into one of my favorite hobbies, or it's before I walk into a store to go shopping because that's one of my favorite hobbies, right? It's really who I am. It's my authentic self, and I sometimes think that we forget who that is when we are trying to maybe get a job where maybe my morals and ethics don't line up with that. Or maybe that's not really something I agree with, but I really want this job. And so the first thing I do is I ask myself, is this part of your brand? Is this who you are, Margie, at the core? And so I really believe that's how brands start. But I think it's more than just that. So that's where it's at. But then are you living that out every day? So here I'm saying, these are my values. These are my morals. These are my ethics. This is what I stand for. This is who I want to be associated with. but am I living that out? And I really think that's the part that obviously can be a little bit harder, right? Just because
Mhm.
of human
Sure.
nature. However, I have to remind myself, am I being my authentic self? Am I being honest to not only my family, friends, organization, but to Margie?
Well, that's a good point you're making because there should be alignment between what you value and believe in. And does that align with the mission and the vision and the culture, the climate of the company where you're going to work? And so sometimes, we got to be careful of being short-sighted. I just need a job, but then I go work somewhere that's not aligned with what I believe in. And then that can lead to sometimes being asked to leave or you make a decision to leave. And then
Hmm.
that's a mark you don't really want to have on your brand. Brand is about what people would say about you if you were not in the room. That's why we do reference checks. And so it is important to have a strong professional and personal brand because we ask people to bring their entire whole self to work. That's where you can really optimize being the best employees when you can be yourself. So brand is important. Something else I think about leadership and not so much having the desire to be in a leadership role where people are reporting to you, but being recognized as a leader in the role that you are in. And those things are important about your brand. And they're quite frankly questions that people ask when they're thinking about hiring you and when they're doing reference checks. Do my behavior signal that I am a leader? So, what does that look like? How do I signal to a potential employer, to a current employer, that I am a leader and ready for more opportunities?
So let me tell you just a quick story here,
Okay.
Gloria. When I was doing some mentoring coaching, I had an employee say to me, I think I want to be a better leader. And I was business mindset, even though I was HR, it was business. And I said, are you looking to become a supervisor? You don't have any direct reports right now. And this person said to me, no, I really like my role. They were very good in their role, but I want to be a leader for the team, not a manager, not a supervisor, a leader. And so I always remember that conversation because it was eye opening to me that so many people lead. Leading is not being a manager. And so, whatever type of leader you want to be, whether you're trying to get a management style role or you want to be a leader on your team, or maybe you just want to lead a project, that's great too. I always say you need to have two things first. You have to have problem solving ability because there's always going to be problems, right? We have this 2020, we had a huge problem, right? The pandemic. Let's hope we don't see that again, right? But
For
that's a
sure.
huge problem. Every day, though, we have small problems. Somebody scheduled and they didn't think they were, or they needed the day off, or a customer's upset. There's always going to be some sort of problem, regardless of the industry that you're in. And are you able to come up with solutions, whether they have to be right now or strategic solutions in the future to solve those issues, those problems. So that's number one. And then number two is I think you have to be able to be open and honest with feedback. So giving feedback as well as receiving it. And I always say, people say, oh, I'm great at and I say, you know what? You listen to your manager or your supervisor very well and you take their feedback. But then sometimes I see leaders not looking at their teams and listening to their feedback. They almost have a sense of arrogance, like, oh no, I know this, I'm in this role. And Gloria, you say it all the time, and I applaud you for this because you say, help me. If I'm doing something that's, that isn't for our brand, or you want, if you think you have a better idea, say it, and I think that's really being vulnerable. It's being authentic and it's taking that feedback from others, especially those who maybe aren't at your level.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about that in terms of leadership because truly, if it's a team you're leading, a project you're leading, whatever the case might be, leadership skills are another part of your brand that makes you marketable and makes you employable. As a business owner, I look for people who can solve problems. I look for people that can bring ideas to the forefront about continuous improvement. Margie, I always say when we're talking, if you have a better idea, if we can do it differently, my feelings will not be hurt. Don't let the fact that I'm the CEO stop you from contributing because that's what we expect. And so when I'm interviewing candidates and talking to people about leading projects or leading people, one of the conversations happens to be, what type of contributions are you willing to make? What type of problems can you solve? What do you know about the business? That was one of the reasons why, honestly, it was easy when it came to saying, you're hired, Margie, because you had a business background. I mean, you were talking about things like EBITDA and profit margins and things like that. You're an L&D consultant that has a business hat on. So I knew you understood how the bottom line works or how we get to the bottom line. And so, regardless if you're at the front of the organization or the top of
Mhm,
the organization, where you are from your role, you need to lead, be able to solve problems, be able to give feedback, and be able to take feedback
mhm,
because that's about growth and development. So, those are key points. The other thing that I like about being leaders, regardless if it's the official title or not, are you fully engaged in what you do at work? Are you present? Do you contribute? And I ask people, how do you contribute to the organization's success? What have you done lately that's contributing to the organization's success? What are your contributions? Are you value focused? What's your value proposition? Not what is your position summary on your resume. I don't care about that. I
mhm,
care about what is your value proposition, how you can solve problems, how you can be honest with feedback to help other people grow, and how can you receive it to help yourself develop. So, those are some things around leadership. Now, there are some gaps sometimes that people
mhm,
have in seeing who they really are. And we talked about earlier assessments. We're going to, if you want, you can email us and we're going to send you an assessment and you can answer some reflecting questions. It's a point of reflection of being truthful with yourself. Would you hire yourself? We've got some questions for you. But one of the things I think sometimes people confuse with employability and marketability is how busy they are. Well, I did all of this on the job description, and my calendar is always full. So, yeah, I was contributing at work. And my question is, does effort equal results?
mhm,
And so, what do you think about that? Effort versus results? Because you can spend a lot of time with
mhm.
effort and not have any output or results.
Absolutely. I think we live in a world where busy means productive. Busy means value driven. And that's not necessarily the case. I can put meetings on the calendar, and say I'm busy, which I am, right? That whole calendar congestion. But am I being impactful in what I'm doing? Am I being valuable in what I'm doing? Am I getting results in that busy time? And so I really think we have to stop and ask ourselves, am I being busy or am I being productive? Because those can be interchangeable, but they're definitely not always interchangeable. And so what I always say to people is, have you thought of a stretch assignment? Well, what do you mean? What is a stretch assignment? What is something that stems from your job profile or your job description and takes it a little bit further, stretches it. And so, when you start getting people to think like that, they start realizing that, wait a minute, you mean I don't need to be in a meeting for those 3 hours? No, let's find something else to do. Let's do a stretch assignment. Let's do something that is going to not only be impactful to the organization or to your team, but that's also going to increase your knowledge, your skills, your abilities,
Mhm.
and make you more marketable in, whether it's the workforce or in your current organization, because being busy isn't showing those things.
That is true, but I will tell you, I know sometimes it gets confused with they look busy, but I ask, what's the output? What's the
Absolutely.
outcome? what's the result. So I want people to think about that when you're looking for a job and you're completing an application, you're sending in a resume. Don't make it about busy work. Make it about value. Make it about contributions. And to your point, use your time wisely at work, not to look busy, to be productive. And if you get the job done sooner, that's okay. Use that
Mhm.
time for development.
Yeah.
Use that time for contributions. Now, Margie, you and I talked about when Fridays come along that we might just start spending some time talking about continuous improvement, talking about what we're going to do differently, spending time every week just dreaming about how things could be better. And I like for people to talk about how they come to a job with continuous improvement ideas to do things much better than what's currently happening to move past the status quo. And so those are things we look for too.
Absolutely. I always say, think outside the box. Color outside the line. As long as it is legal, moral, ethical, and it hits all of those standards, let's think, how can we do it better? And or I will say to somebody, especially during coaching, if you were the CEO or if you owned this organization, what would you do? Tell me, what would be your wild and crazy dreams that you think this organization or this team or this department could do? That's when really the mind starts working right. We start brainstorming. And so I think it's so important because that's where continuous improvement comes from. Who would have thought in 2016 that we would have had these AI things who can basically, write different stuff for us, right? Write prompts, write codes, write papers, all these different paragraphs and all these things. But that's because somebody thought big. And so, what are ways that we can think big? And I think when you're either trying to get a job or get a promotion, whatever it might be employable. I think employers want to see that. They want to see that you're thinking outside the box. And so, if you're only talking about what's in that job description that you saw online, th- they're s- they're saying right there that you're not thinking outside the box. You're just giving us exactly what we told you you had to have. Give us some other ideas. Give us some other thoughts.
For sure. And something else that you mentioned that I think is really important. It's around the whole problem solving piece, but it's not I don't have to stay in a lane. Sometimes people say, well, that's not what's on the job description. The job description says this. And then sometimes there's that little bitty print that says any and everything else that might be within
Yes.
the job. And so I really ask for people to color outside the lines, think outside the box, dream, and think like an owner. You mentioned that. Think like the CEO. If I own this business, would I hire myself and be honest about that? And if not, why wouldn't you? What can you do to change? Because I can tell you, if you're interviewing with the C suite, if you're interviewing with an owner of a company, even the hiring manager, think like them. Think what their issues might be and how you might be able to solve them. Now, there's something of other than just that I want to talk about too is high maintenance. If you are a high maintenance employee, you probably are not going to get promoted and you may not get a job if you are high maintenance. So, what does high maintenance look like? I always got an excuse for not showing up on time. It's something. It may be legit to you, but constantly late. And we're always having conversations about you needing to be on time or having to
Mhm.
always rework your schedule. Or you're late with a project and we're always having to talk with you about that. That's high maintenance for managers
Mhm.
and quite frankly, stressful.
Absolutely. I actually had someone who did a wonderful job, great job at what she did, all around. And she came to me and she said, I really would like your input on something like from the L&D side as well as the HR side. She said, I've been passed over for a few promotions and I'm not really sure why. And I knew I could have a real conversation with her. And so I said, let's look at everything, all of your positives, your strengths, what you're doing well. And I never use the word negative, but I say, let's look at your opportunities. Where can you grow a little bit? And she didn't really know how to answer that. And I said, how many times have you complained about the type of pens in the office? And she kind of laughed and she said, well, I don't really like the ones that they order." I said, "Okay." I said, "And then how many times have you had issues with the printer? Not issues IT, but you didn't wanna print things for reasons." And she's like, "Okay, I know where you're going with this," you know? And I said, "Sometimes, unfortunately, that's being high maintenance, and that will cost you a promotion, or it will cost you the job.
Mhm.
Because if you're at this level and you're complaining about the pens, what are you going to do when you get to the next level, right?" And of course, we always are going to have small complaints.
Sure, for sure.
We order new highlighters in an office and they don't work. And so everybody's like, we need new ones. That's always going to happen. But when you become the constant complainer or the constant person who's like, nope, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. You are going to start to get looked over, even if your performance is really good. Because even though you're not really doing anything wrong, this is times that you could be maybe doing other things for the company. So to me, those are the high maintenance things that we have to really be honest with ourselves. And I think that's the most important part is being honest. Now, like I said, I knew I could have a real conversation with her. She laughed and she's like, when she left, she said, "I'm going to start buying my own pens." And we had a good laugh about it. But I saw her about 6 months later. She was in a different organization than I was. I saw her about 6 months later, and she said, "Well, I haven't gotten a promotion, but I will tell you, Margie, that a couple people have told me that my attitude has changed." So she saw it, she knew it,
Mhm.
and so I think that helped her. And so really it's being honest with yourself because you can hear it from everybody else, but until you're honest with yourself, you can't change it.
Well, it's a signal. If you are constantly complaining about little things, that's a signal. And the other part of that is, if I don't like the pens, let me make some recommendations. Did the company know that these are better pens?
Right.
Instead of complaining, having solutions. And if you don't have a complete solution, at least come with some thoughts and that people can say, well, you thought about this and let's try to work it out. So being a constant complainer about every little thing is high maintenance and it can drive your opportunities for promotions
Mhm.
down. I'm going to talk about this. Yes, you are a high performer when you are there, but I can't depend on you. These are some things that are high maintenance that managers don't want to have to deal with. And, their work habit issues. Actually, it is very difficult to address work habit issues because those things sometimes can be taken personally by the
Mhm.
person you're talking to. Luckily, the person you talked to, Margie, they understood that was some positive feedback you were giving. But
Mhm.
these are things to think about in terms of what's your brand. Some things can erode your brand, even though you're a great worker. I had a person that I was working with once coaching. She said, Gloria, I can't get promoted. I don't know what my brand is in the company. She said, but I show up every day. I do my job. I keep my head down. I don't really say a lot to people. No, I'm not really highly engaged with other people interpersonally, but I still do a good job. And I said, that's why you're not promoted.
Mhm.
And they were like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "It's more than just doing the job. Collaboration, volunteering,
Sure.
interpersonal skills, working with others, having an opportunity for people to get to know you beyond just your job description." I said,
Mhm.
"There have been opportunities for you to work on certain projects." You said, "No, that's not a part of my job." I said, "I know there's that little print on that job description, but you're just showing up, going to your cubicle. People don't know you." And so we're talking about things that can erode your brand, but
Mhm.
being engaged, being a contributor, solving problems, creating value, those are things that make you more marketable, employable in your current job or in a job that you are looking for outside of the company. Margie, I have a saying. My saying is it's a job getting a job
Mhm.
and it's a job keeping a job. And if you don't want to just have 1 year's experience 10 times, it's going to take some work.
It definitely is. And I think we have to put the work in. And again, I always like to think of it as I'm not just putting the work in for the organization or for the industry or for the customers, although I am putting it in for that. And I want to make sure that I'm doing a great job, but I'm putting it in for myself. And I actually had somebody say to me one time, "Well, I don't know why I would do that. I know the person that would be my natural next step, they're never going to leave." And I said, "They're going to retire with that company." And I just jokingly said, "Well, what if they win the big lottery and they go live on an island somewhere and now that position is available?" And honestly, it was kind of an aha moment for this person. And that's really how you have to look at it, because the longer you're in the business world, the corporate world, the government world, whatever world, whatever industry you're in, things change. And so if you're already in a organizations like to promote from within. It's just a good thing. They don't have to retrain someone. They don't have to bring them into the culture. And so we have to remember that. And I always also like to say that when you are making yourself employable, marketable, it starts at that very, very beginning piece. Whether that beginning piece is you at a new job, you getting it, you going through the interview, whatever that is, you're always starting your brand. You're always showing your brand. And you want to continue that. And that's the other thing that I think is really hard is when you show a brand and then you let that brand just kind of slide off. We have to remember to work because that's a job in it of itself, making sure that we are keeping our brand.
Most definitely. And we work in a time where downsizing, right sizings happen. In fact, that happened to me. That's how I started Hicks Carter Hicks. A company sold off, and I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do? Go back into the corporate world, start a business. What am I going to do? I didn't worry about it too much because I knew I had skills. I knew I was building a brand. I knew that I had taken advantage of the resources that companies had offered over the years. And so this time, when it came around 27 years later, and it was like, okay, so the company is selling, they're moving out of town. You don't want to move. What are you going to do? It
Mhm,
wasn't a problem. I went back to my roots where my parents had started their business, and I said, now is the right time
mhm,
because I'm prepared. Over 20 some odd years ago, I wouldn't have been prepared. But in the back of my mind, all the time, I was thinking about I am building a brand that will work in the corporate world. I am building a brand that will work if I start my own company. And so I'm going to take advantage of every opportunity, not just from 9 to 5, 8 to 5, but I'm taking advantage of every opportunity that I can for when I start a business. So we always need to be prepared because there are some plans that are enacted that we have nothing to do with as it
mhm.
relates to impacting our career. So this has been a good
Yeah.
conversation. Margie, thank you so much for being a co host today, a guest, and thank you so much for being on our team. So let's get ready to wrap up for a minute. So, some of the things that we have talked about that's important that makes you employable, marketable, inside, outside of your company is having a strong professional brand because people will ask about your brand. So, what will
Mhm,
people say about you when you are not present? Understand there is a difference between being busy and being valuable. If you're loading up your resume, your application for that job on things that are busyness, just reiterating the job description or the job posting and not talking about your value, that doesn't make you marketable. Look at what you are doing and is there a positive outcome to the effort that you are putting in? Lead from your position. It does not have to be a formal position of leadership, but are you volunteering? Are you visible or are you hiding? People don't know you if they don't see you, if they
mhm.
don't experience you. So be contributing. What are some of the biggest gaps? Know when you're ready.
Yes.
Look back over the last few years and have you grown during that time? And if not, what do you need to do to get that perfect job, that perfect opportunity that you're looking for? Have your own development and growth plan. And the other thing, don't be high maintenance. Let's look for ways to contribute to the organization's culture, its bottom line, whatever that company does. Look for ways to say, I'm valuable. I'm not a problem. So, those are some things to think about in terms of marketability and also employability. So, have a call to action for you. If you really want to do some reflection internally about, am I marketable? Am I employable? Email us and we will send you a self assessment. And we do have an upcoming podcast episode in this series. And the next one is, have you ever been fired figuratively or literally? It's all about you, the employee. We are going to be talking about things that happen to people over their career. You want to get employed? Sometimes something happens and you may not be in that job that you hope to have retired in or stayed in longer because a plan happened that wasn't your plan and you lost an opportunity. It's not the end of the world. So please listen for episode number 2. Have you been fired figuratively or literally? And how do you recover? And so you can listen to us the fourth Monday of every month is when we publish new episodes. And you can listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Margie, big thank you for
Thank you.
helping make this a good session. It's always good to have somebody to talk to on these podcasts. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gloria. This was great. And if I could just leave my final words of advice would just be always be your authentic self. That's the most important thing. Remember your brand, it is your foundation. And if you can put that first and foremost, all of the other things will come as you begin to learn and develop through experiences and wisdom.
Well, thank you for those closing words. And this is the end of episode number 1. We hope to see you with episode number 2. Bye.
Bye.